there is no such thing as a normal brain, right? Everybody has a unique constellation of things that they're good at, and relative to those things that they're good at, things that they struggle with, right? If you plug that operating system into, again, that traditional like interview environment, that traditional team meeting or office environment, the operating system that they're working with isn't going to be presented with any unique barriers that's going to prohibit them from participating in that environment.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Charles Kransberger. He's the Director of Neurodivergent Talent Solutions at Simplify Workforce. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, excited to have you. So, Charles, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So long story short, I've always been interested in creating value for neurodistinct and disabled populations through my work. And it's really just taken me down a series of career pivots to figure out what my niche was going to be in that space. So my original concept of what that looked like would be to become a special education teacher. So that's how I spent my first 7 semesters of undergrad. But by my 3rd student teaching placement, I just felt like I was shoving math and reading down these kids' throats, and figured that I could work with them, this population, but at a different age, and wanted to have a more employment focus in my work rather than an academic focus. So I ended up pivoting to rehabilitation counseling, which is what my master's degree was in. Launched my career out in Colorado, working for the government system out there. Had a neurodivergent caseload as well as a blind and low vision caseload for a couple of years in the Denver and Colorado Springs area. Again, working for the government wasn't really for me. I wanted to try a different system. So I ended up moving to Alabama during the beginning of the pandemic, 2020, to launch my career in higher ed. So I was at the University of Alabama Office of Disability Service and had a caseload of over 500 students, many of whom were neurodistinct, and I was really facilitating their academic accommodations on campus, as well as doing a lot of triage, getting them to different supports and resources around campus, et cetera. During the pandemic, I also became a father, and at that point, working from home became a non-negotiable for my lifestyle. So I began looking at opportunities to pivot into the private sector, because I was seeing a lot more flexibility in terms of adapting to the pandemic landscape. So I found a position as Director of Neurodivergent Talent Solutions with Simplify Workforce. I've been here for about a year now, and I'm loving it. I think I'm in the private sector, is here to stay. So I spend my days really bridging the gap between forward-thinking companies that are trying to do a better job of hiring and retaining their neurodistinct workforce, which is about 20% or 1 in 5 folks who are working today, and those neurodivergent job seekers. So that's what my role looks like in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, one, congratulations on being a new dad. That's fantastic.
Appreciate it.
I've mentioned in other episodes, I don't know if I mentioned to you that I was a school social worker for several years. So, certainly I understand the challenges of, certainly working with, the learning to or teaching kids how to read, that's a feat in itself. I certainly respect people who have the skills to do that. But anyway, let's go ahead and let's really dive into talking about Simplify Workforce. And, for our listeners who may not understand what neurodivergent means, let's start at the beginning and explain to me what neurodivergent means.
Sure. So in a nutshell, when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're talking about the fact that every single person on the planet has a very different brain and nervous system that they're working with. And in the context of work, that brain and nervous system, you can think of it like an operating system, impacts how we interact with those processes, like in interviewing and onboarding and et cetera. How we interact with the physical office spaces that we're working in, how we're interacting with our coworkers and customers, et cetera, right? So if you think of just the fact that there is no such thing as a normal brain, right? So like everybody has a unique constellation of things that they're good at, and relative to those things that they're good at, things that they struggle with, right? So if you mapped out someone who was neurotypical, what their brain looks like, you would see that, if you plug that operating system into, again, that traditional like interview environment, that traditional team meeting or office environment, the operating system that they're working with isn't going to be presented with any unique barriers that's going to prohibit them from participating in that environment, right? But when you're talking about someone who's neurodivergent, you also hear it referred to as neurodistinct. If you looked at their operating system, again, they're still going to have some awesome strengths and be on average better at these certain skill sets than neurotypical folks, but you're also going to see, some of those relative challenges where they have some support needs, where again, in that same exact interview environment, office setting, etc., they are going to experience some barriers that, could prohibit them from being as productive as they could, as innovative, etc. So that can look a lot of different ways. A lot of the conversation around neurodiversity is around folks who are autistic, dyslexic, ADHDers, etc. But there's at least a dozen different neurotypes, and there's some debates about what that full definition looks like, and who's included in that neurodivergent group. But that's, long story short, what that looks like.
I think that's fantastic. And thank you so much for the background to help kind of our listeners set the stage for neurodiversity and really talking about what Simplify Workforce does. So tell me, what does Simplify Workforce do?
Sure. So we are really in that global workforce technology solutions space. We are best known for our vendor management system, our VMS. So we're just a few years old as a company and very, very much still in that startup phase. But we're growing, from that foundation of the VMS offering into more of the total talent management space. So, for example, we just in the last couple of years launched our neurodiversity platforms, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes here. We're in the direct sourcing space now. We have a healthcare launch in a couple of months here. So we are still very much in that contingent workforce space. With the VMS, that's our bread and butter. That's what pays the bills a lot of the times. But we're growing some more tentacles and really investing heavily in that total talent management space globally.
That's fantastic. And, you're talking about, global, it sounds like, that tech space. Do you see trends in, who your clients, tend to be, whether it be size, industry, or whatnot?
So we're really working with clients across industries. So for example, we built the Neurodiversity Career Connector platform for the Neurodiversity at Work Employer Roundtable group. In that group, you're seeing folks like in tech, like Microsoft and IBM. You're seeing finance like Wells Fargo and JP Morgan. Ford Motor Company is in there. We work with universities. Like there's a lot of different folks that we're working with, again, in different continents and across different industries. So not really specific or niche. Again, we're in the neurodiversity space, the healthcare space, etc., but working with a broad array of clients.
That's fantastic. And, when we're talking about your clients, what specifically when they come to you, what's the biggest challenge that they have? Is it needing kind of that vendor management system? And, I also want to kind of dive back into that platform that you're talking about as well, but go ahead and answer that question.
Sure. So in the neurodiversity space, what we're finding from an enterprise perspective is the neurodiversity at work movement has really gained steam in about the last decade. And it started with a lot of different pilot programs where these companies are bringing in small cohorts of neurodistinct talent in maybe one or two roles, working with some of their best managers and launching their initiatives that way. But what they're finding in a lot of cases is that those pilot programs aren't scaling particularly well, because again, when you're not working with your best managers and you're working with folks of a variety of neurotypes and not just in a couple of specific roles, and you're trying to really create a neuro-inclusive culture and have that neuroinclusion penetrate the whole company, that's kind of where they're hitting that roadblock in terms of their evolution towards being more neuro-inclusive, right? And when you realize that you're talking about a population of over 1 billion people that experience about a 30 to 40% unemployment rates, and that rises to about 70 to 80% for autistic folks, that's really the new frontier of this neurodiversity at work movement, is finding those scalable, particularly tech-enabled solutions that can actually put a dent in that unemployment rates and that gap that we're seeing, right?
Mhm.
So our platform certainly offers that scalability to folks. Be it when you have talent pools that have thousands of neurodistinct job seekers and a intuitive process to connect those employers to those talent pools, that's what can really penetrate that company culture and offer that scalability.
And I want to circle back. You mentioned, Ford, JP Morgan, some large companies talking about utilizing the platform. Walk me through what the platform is and how it works.
Definitely. So we have two offerings now. So I'll start with that neurodiversity career connector piece. So we launched that in 2021, and it's grown to the point of having almost 2,000 neurodistinct job seekers in our talent pool at this point. And again, it's an exclusive offering. So you have to be in that neurodiversity at work employer roundtable group in order to source candidates from that platform. And that group consists of about 60 employers right now. So those employers can access this talent pool. We have a concierge team that works with both the enterprises and the candidates so that we can walk them through how to optimize their engagement with the platform. And again, we're really those neurodiversity evangelists that are preaching those best practices throughout that process and what that looks like. Just recently launched a webinar and article series that speaks to some of those good practices that we want to see being adhered to on our platform, certainly. So yeah, it's really a funnel to bridge that gap between the enterprises and the talent pool. So that's what the career connector looks like. We also in the last month launched neurodiversify.ai, because we wanted to bring to market an offering that wasn't exclusive to that group of employers, that we could offer to our existing like VMS clients. For example, we work with, I think, about 120 or 130 different businesses, that we want to encourage to start hiring more neuro-inclusively as well. So that's what that platform looks like. And it's again, just being launched in the last month, still in that pilot phase and, growing, and, excited to see where that goes.
How exciting. It sounds like you guys have seen a lot of growth, starting with the neurodiversity career connector, now going to neurodiversity AI. It sounds like, Simplify Workforce has really been growing.
Definitely. Yeah, we've hit a pretty accelerated growth curve, even in this past year since I've been here. Added, I think when I started, we had maybe 300 employees, and now we're closer to 500 or 600. So yeah, almost doubled in size the last couple of years, as far as I know. Yeah, a lot of growth in the US, the UK, Australia, India, a lot of different markets that we've been growing our footprint in and our employee base.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious, kind of taking a little bit of a step back, talking about common misconceptions. I certainly think that there are probably a lot of misconceptions around neurodiversity as well. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective, is there anything that sticks out to you that people think, may be accurate, which isn't necessarily true?
Definitely. So I think there's many. I'll just touch on one or two. So I think a lot of times when people think about neurodiversity, what comes to mind is like children and the education system and this research agenda that has really focused on like treatments and cures, versus the neurodiversity at work movement really seeks to help these folks live more fulfilling lives and create solutions to that effect, with, of course, employment being a cornerstone of that. And I also think from a enterprise perspective, a lot of times people think that the neurodiversity at work movement is about charity, when in fact it's really what really prompted the business community to invest heavily in neurodiversity is the competitive advantage that's associated with having a neurodiversified workforce. So again, we're talking about 20% of the population that's neurodistinct. So if 1 out of 5 people in your company are experiencing barriers in the hiring process, or once they're there, they're not as innovative and productive as they could be, they're experiencing burnout, all the things, right? There's a real cost associated with that, to not being able to attract and retain retain top talent and that lost innovation, productivity, et cetera, right? And in addition, I think people think that this is going to require this like wholesale change and be expensive, and it's you're going to do all this work just for a small number of people, right? But they're actually finding that when you adopt these neuro-inclusive best practices, it's appreciated by a much wider audience. So again, those good practices that you can implement for your hiring processes, onboarding protocols, team meetings, office spaces, events, etc. When you're designing for those neurodistinct use cases, 100% of your workforce will appreciate that neuro-inclusive design rather than that 20%. So yeah, I think those are some of the most common misconceptions. So yeah, I just want to encourage people to think about that, because we're approaching the point where there's going to be a critical mass of employers who are adopting neuro-inclusion. I mentioned some of those big blue chip employers that are already on that path. And what we're going to see, soon here is that the less inclusive competitors are going to lose out on 20% of the workforce, a lot of that top talent, and they're going to flock to those companies that are more inclusive and have a more appealing company culture. So yeah, I think those are some of the biggest misconceptions that I see.
I think those are really important to acknowledge, and I appreciate you sharing your insights on that. And if people wanted to learn more about Simplify Workforce, where would they go to learn more?
So you can find us in a few different places. So my LinkedIn is Charles Kransberger. I'd be happy to schedule meetings with you all via email at charles.kransberger@simplifyvms.com. Our website is just simplifyvms.com. The Neurodiversify website is neurodiversify.ai, and the Neurodiversity Career Connector is ndcc.simplifyhire.com.
That's
so
great.
Yeah, those are some of the best channels to follow up with us.
And we'll make sure we link them in the description as well for you. But
Appreciate that.
Charles, this has been a great conversation. As we start to wrap up, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with, whether it be something about Simplify Workforce, advice that you've received, anything like that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think that the spirit that I want to leave the listeners with is just the spirit of collaboration, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity for alignment and partnership in this space with the existing agendas that people have in place. Obviously there's been a huge diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, particularly these last few years, that's gained a lot of traction. And I've seen neurodiversity be omitted from a lot of those agendas. So I think there's a real opportunity for collaboration there. There's been a huge conversation about mental health. And again, I think the conversations around neurodistinct burnout and the endemic of neurodistinct folks masking in the workplace and how that contributes to bad mental health outcomes, et cetera, has been omitted from that conversation, et cetera. So yeah, I would just encourage folks to break out of those silos and figure out ways to create those partnerships and incorporate neurodiversity in your agenda. And again, with 20% of folks being neurodistinct, these folks are already in your offices, they're already at your dinner tables, etc. So start engaging with that community and try to get your information about neurodiversity directly from them, because again, there's a lot of bad information out there on the market, and a lot from that more so medical paradigm rather than the neurodiversity paradigm. So yeah, I would just encourage that reframe for people as well.
Great reframe. I really appreciate that, especially as a social worker. So, I appreciate that. Well, awesome. Well, Charles, this has been a terrific conversation. I appreciate all your insights on neurodiversity, really breaking down the career connector and, the new neurodiversity AI. I think it's fantastic. I think this was a really great, insightful conversation. I really appreciate you being on Business Ninjas today.
Likewise, Kelsey, thanks so much for having me. Look forward to touching base again soon.
Yeah, great to have you.